Okay, let's get into something really important today, especially if you know you're a parent or maybe just thinking about kids in the future.
Yeah, it's about the huge impact big tech and this whole digital environment is having.
Right, specifically on childhood development and mental health. We're going to be leaning heavily on the insights of social scientist Jonathan Haidt, looking at his recent work, especially around his book, The Anxious Generation.
And what's really striking is just how fast this has all happened, how profoundly things like social media, smartphones, just constant internet access, how they're fundamentally changing what it means to be a kid today.
Absolutely. So our goal, our sort of mission for this deep dive is to really understand what are the big shifts in childhood over, say, the last 15 years. How is technology actually driving this? And crucially, what can we maybe do about it? All without, drowning you in jargon.
Yeah, trying to make sense of it because it's a massive societal shift, and Haight's work gives us a really helpful framework, I think.
And just to give you a taste of how weirdly specific and maybe even unsettling this gets, think about this example Haidt uses. A girl deletes a few selfies off her phone. Seems innocent enough, right?
Uh-huh.
But that action, that simple deletion, can actually trigger targeted ads for beauty products. The algorithm basically goes, potential insecurity here.
Wow. Yeah, that tells you a lot, doesn't it? It's a tiny glimpse into how sophisticated the tracking is and how it can, well, potentially leverage vulnerabilities.
Exactly, especially with young people. So maybe let's start at the beginning. Why is childhood such a critical period? Why does this digital influence matter so much then?
Well, biologically speaking, humans have these incredibly large brains. And to wire them up properly, we need a really long childhood, a long developmental runway, you could say.
Okay.
And Haight talks about culture being our secret power. Childhood is the time when our brains get wired into that culture. It's essential.
How does that wiring happen? Like, what's the mechanism?
The main engine really is play. Simple as that. It's not just fluff, it's a biological imperative. You see it across mammals. Evolution designed us to learn through play.
Hmm.
Kids explore the physical world, they pick up language, figure out social rules. It's all happening through play. It's how they learn the ropes.
And the concern is that screen time, the digital world, is effectively elbowing out that essential playtime.
Precisely. When kids are spending hours on screens instead of running around outside or interacting face to face or just messing about, well, the developmental outcomes aren't always great. Something gets lost.
Now, Haidt discusses this major shift,
Mm.
this loss of play, and then something he calls the great rewiring. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So historically, certainly in Western countries, kids playing outside unsupervised was normal,
Hmm.
expected even.
Yeah, I remember that.
But then this weird thing, as Haight calls it, happened in the Anglosphere. So UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand back in the 1990s. Even though crime rates were actually falling, parents started restricting outdoor play much more.
Which seems backwards, right? Safer streets, but kids stay inside more.
Exactly. It's odd. And Haight frames this whole period as a tragedy in two acts. Act one was the 90s and early 2000s, this big decline in free play. But interestingly, during that period, we didn't see a major spike in, say, depression among kids.
Okay, so the play decreased, but mental health didn't plummet immediately.
Yeah.
What was Act Two then? That sounds like where things really change.
Act two is roughly 2010 to 2015. That's what he calls the Great Rewiring. This is when smartphones and social media platforms just explode onto the scene, become
All right,
ubiquitous.
everyone suddenly had one.
And that's when we see this really sharp, really concerning downturn in youth mental health data.
And it wasn't just the US or the UK.
No, the pattern isn't strictly limited to the Anglosphere. You see similar worrying trends emerging in Northern European countries, too, even with their different traditions around childhood. The timing often aligns with the mass adoption of smartphones and social media there as well.
Okay, let's dig into that mental health crisis a bit more.
Mhm.
What are we actually seeing? What kinds of problems are increasing?
We're mainly talking about internalizing disorders, so things like depression and anxiety. The data shows this incredibly sharp increase, like an elbow in the graph, around 2012, 2013.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah, for anxiety, depression, self-harm rates. Particularly in the US and other English-speaking countries, Australia and New Zealand saw it maybe a touch later, but the pattern was similar.
Was this happening everywhere? Were there exceptions?
Well, interestingly, the data Haight presents suggests that Eastern Europe didn't see that same dramatic jump in depression rates among young people during that same period, which, raises questions about why. What was different there?
And within the U.S., did it affect all kids equally?
No, the deeper dive into the U.S. data shows the increases were steeper for certain groups. Girls, for instance. Also, kids from families that weren't religious and those who identified politically as liberal.
Okay, that's specific. Why those groups? What's the thinking there?
Well, Haidt brings up this idea, drawing on the sociologist Emil Durkheim, that kids benefit from being part of a moral community, something that gives them clear norms, a sense of belonging, structure. Durkheim called the breakdown of norms anomie.
Normlessness. Okay.
Right. And the hypothesis is that perhaps families with strong religious ties or maybe more conservative backgrounds provide more of that built-in structure, that moral anchor.
So the idea is that for kids without that strong anchor, the kind of chaotic, norm-shifting, constant comparison world of social media might hit harder. It might amplify feelings of being adrift.
That seems to be the argument. Haidt points to survey data showing that while conservatives and religious folks were always maybe slightly happier pre-2012, that gap widened a lot afterwards. Secular liberal youth saw a much bigger drop in well-being. He essentially argues that secular capitalism plus smartphones creates this uniquely destabilizing brew, especially for that group.
That's a heavy thought. Okay, let's talk about the tech companies themselves. Is Haidt saying all tech is equally problematic here?
No, he makes a pretty clear distinction. He suggests that some companies, think like Amazon or Alphabet, Google, probably offer a net positive overall, despite maybe having some downsides, e-commerce, information access.
Right, useful tools.
But he argues that companies like Meta, so Facebook and Instagram, along with Snapchat and TikTok, might actually be generating a net negative value, particularly for kids.
And what's the fundamental difference? Why are those platforms singled out?
It boils down to their business model. It's almost entirely based on advertising, which means their primary goal, above everything else, is to maximize engagement. Keep your eyeballs glued to the screen.
You'd be scrolling.
Exactly. They're not selling you a product you buy once. They're selling your attention to advertisers. And that relentless drive for engagement, Haidt argues, often comes at the expense of user well-being.
He uses strong language, calling them predatory. What's the basis for that?
Well, he points to evidence from whistleblowers, people like Arturo Bejar talking about safety issues, Frances Haugen's revelations about Facebook, Instagram, plus all the lawsuits from parents, actions by state attorneys general.
Right, there's been a lot of that.
And apparently, internal documents often show these companies knew about potential harms, they had research showing negative effects, but effective solutions weren't always implemented, seemingly because they might reduce engagement.
This idea of negative net value is interesting. How does that work?
There was this study by an economist, Leonardo Burston. He asked students how much they'd need to be paid to quit Instagram and TikTok for a month. They named a price.
Okay.
But then he asked, okay, how much would you pay to have everyone else quit too? And the answer flipped. They were willing to pay to get off if everyone else did too.
Ah, so they know it's maybe not great for them, but they feel trapped because that's where the social life is. The fear of missing out.
Exactly. They're kind of stuck in this collective action problem. It suggests people feel the cost, but can't easily opt out individually.
Instagram keeps coming up, especially regarding girls. What makes it such a powerful force there?
Haidt talks about general differences, on average, between what tends to capture girls' interest versus boys. Girls often focus more on social information, who's doing what with whom, social dynamics, appearance.
Yeah.
And Instagram, with its visual focus and constant updates on likes, comments, follows, it's like perfect bait for that social monitoring instinct in teenage girls. It can be incredibly hard to resist.
A constant feed of social validation or lack thereof.
Precisely. And once most of your friends are on it, communicating through DMs, sharing things, leaving feels like social suicide for many kids. Plus, the visual nature just ramps up the social comparison. You're constantly seeing these curated, filtered, perfected images of peers and influencers.
Which can really feed into insecurities. Like that selfie example we started with.
Exactly. The platform design can inadvertently, or maybe even intentionally, exploit those very insecurities. And we haven't even mentioned the higher rates of things like online harassment and sexual predation that disproportionately affect girls on these visual platforms, or the intense pressure towards perfectionism.
Okay, so that's the picture for girls. What about boys? Is it the same story, or are the issues different?
Well, girls show those higher rates of anxiety and depression around age 14. Haidt suggests boys are facing a different kind of crisis, often rooted more in addiction.
Addiction. To what?
Well, the platforms themselves, but also video games, online pornography.
Hmm.
The constant stimulation hooks into the brain's dopamine circuits, that reward pathway. It gets reinforced over and over.
So it's less social comparison, more about the sort of neurological reward loop.
That seems to be a key part of it. And Haidt points out there's this whole ecosystem of things addicting boys now, not just games and porn, but vaping, nicotine pouches, marijuana pens, even gambling mechanics built into video games, sports betting apps. It's a lot. And he references the work of addiction expert Anna Lemke, who points out how one addiction can make you more vulnerable to others. Plus, constantly flooding your brain with dopamine like that can actually downregulate your natural reward system,
Yeah.
meaning you end up feeling kind of bored or flat or anhedonic when you're not doing the highly stimulating thing. It takes more and more to feel good.
And the potential long-term consequences of that for boys.
The concern is it could lead to disengagement, less motivation for school, for building a career, for forming real-world relationships. Kind of checking out.
Beyond the individual mental health impacts, are there broader societal effects Haidt is worried about?
Yeah, he talks about things like the erosion of learning and maybe even social norms. There's this concept of conformity bias. Kids on social media might feel intense pressure to conform to whatever trends or aesthetics are popular online, even if they're not healthy. And also prestige bias. You know, how we figure out who to admire or learn from. Traditionally, it might be based on skill or wisdom. But online, it can get hacked. Status becomes about follower counts, likes, number go up.
Yeah, you see kids saying they want to be a YouTuber, but not necessarily about anything specific, just famous online.
Right. Just wanting the followers. It reflects a shift in what we value, perhaps.
People might say, well, hang on, we had moral panics about television too. How is this different? Is social media really a unique threat?
Haidt acknowledges those parallels, definitely. People worried about TV rotting brains, too. But he argues there are crucial differences that make social media, especially on smartphones, potentially more harmful.
Okay, like what?
For one, TV was often more social. You watch it with family or friends. Smartphones are intensely personal and portable. They fill every spare moment, every gap. There's no downtime. The content is different, too. TV often had longer narratives, maybe some kind of story arc or moral context. Social media is often these tiny, fragmented bursts of streams, TikTok videos, short clips, less context, more constant stimulation.
And the algorithm.
And the biggest difference, probably, is the algorithmic customization. Your feed isn't like anyone else's. It's designed, constantly tweaked to be maximally addictive for you. TV was a broadcast medium. This is narrowcast to the point of hyper-personalization.
So less shared experience, always on, fragmented, and hyper-addictive by design. That does sound different.
Yeah. And Haidt takes this even further, expressing concern about the concentration of power in these tech companies combined with what he sees as maybe broader societal trends towards authoritarianism.
How does he connect those two things, big tech and politics?
The worry is about having these incredibly powerful companies with potentially harmful business models existing alongside a potential weakening of democratic institutions or checks on power. Maybe a shift towards loyalty to strong leaders over processes or norms. And if people's attention spans are fragmented, if their ability for critical thinking is eroded by constant distraction and algorithmically curated information, well, that makes for less effective citizens. It potentially makes a population more vulnerable to manipulation, to demagoguery, harder to sort truth from fiction, especially with AI coming into the mix.
That's a pretty bleak potential future. It paints a worrying picture if things continue on this path.
Yeah.
So, given all this, what does Haidt propose we actually do? What are his solutions?
He lays out 4 main proposals aimed at collective action, changing the norms around childhood.
Okay, what are they?
First, no smartphones before high school, so
Yeah.
basically age 14, delaying that constant personal access.
Right.
Second, no social media before 16, ideally even 18, recognizing these platforms are really adult spaces not designed for kids.
Make sense?
Third, phone-free schools. Get the phones out of the learning environment entirely. Encourage actual face-to-face interaction, less distraction.
Okay. And the last one?
Fourth, more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. Actively push back against the screen time with actual, childhood experiences. More time outdoors, less supervision where appropriate, letting kids take small risks.
So the idea behind these isn't just individual families trying to fight the tide, but setting new societal expectations.
Exactly. It's about tackling that collective action problem. If everyone agrees kids shouldn't have phones till 14 or social media till 16, it takes the pressure off individual parents and kids. It makes it easier to do the healthier thing.
And the potential upside.
Hopefully, a reversal of those terrible trends in youth: mental illness, self-harm, anxiety, depression, a chance for kids to have a healthier developmental trajectory.
And is this feasible? Does it cost a fortune?
Well, that's the thing. Most of these changes cost very little or nothing at all. Phone-free schools can use simple locking pouches, delaying smartphone access that saves money. And there's already evidence coming out from schools that have gone phone-free, showing positive results, better engagement, improved social climate.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the core message seems to be that some specific big tech platforms, mainly the social media giants, are having a really significant negative effect on kids. Their mental health, how they develop, driven largely by business models that prioritize engagement over well-being, hooking into developmental vulnerabilities.
That really captures the essence of Hate's argument, yeah. And the challenge for all of us, for you listening, is to really sit with this information. Think about it. Consider how these ideas, these proposed norms, might play out in your own family, your community, your school.
And if you want to dive deeper into Hate's research and the data behind all this, his websites are the place to go: anxiousgeneration.com and afterbabble.com. Lots more detail there.
Which leaves us, I suppose, with the big question to mull over. Considering everything we've talked about, what is our collective responsibility here? How do we protect childhood in this digital age? And maybe more starkly, what kind of future are we building if we don't change course?